Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. We're filming during the legislative session, and we're talking about one of the most important issues in the session this year. And as guests, we have Bill Fulginiti, the Executive Director of the New Mexico Municipal League, and Fred Nathan, who is the founder and Executive Director of something called Think New Mexico. What is Think New Mexico?
Well, thanks for having me back on the show. Think New Mexico is a results-oriented think tank. We're a little bit different than most think tanks that are either way over on the left or way over on the right. We just believe in a state that's 49th or 50th in too many of these rankings like hunger and poverty, that the focus ought to be on solutions rather than ideology.
Yes. And Bill, the Municipal League, the title says it all, but how many cities, towns, and villages are there, and who lives there?
Lorraine, there are now 106 incorporated municipalities. Kirtland is the latest one, in San Juan County. They become live 1 July. They elected their mayor and council already. 66% of the state's population live inside incorporated boundaries. So 2/3 of the people in New Mexico live in our cities.
Right. So you represent and you serve the cities. I know they call you whenever they have a legal question or insurance question or anything like that. Right. But it is kind of sobering that 2/3 of our people live in this beautiful rural state, live in cities.
That's right.
Now, one other thing I want to say, we're filming in a tiny room in the Capitol, and I've invited you here because you both represent different sides of a really tantalizing and controversial issue, which is the reinstatement of the food tax. Some people go, it's a tax thing, it's too hard. I'm going to ask you to keep it very simple. Everybody eats here. Everybody buys food. So everyone has a stake in this. Correct. So even though I've pushed you together cheek by jowl, if you can just address the pros and cons, maybe one of you can first of all talk about the history of the food tax, okay?
Well, the food tax dates back to the Great Depression, Lorraine, 1933. And back then, New Mexico, like many states, depended on property taxes for its revenue. And of course, during the Depression, property tax plummeted. So we copied actually Mississippi, which was the first state to tax food. And in 1933, we passed a temporary emergency tax that included food and some other things. And it was a 2% tax. And in the intervening 70 years until it was repealed, thankfully, in 2004, it grew from 2% to over 6%. In most places in New Mexico. And so we were the second state. In 1958, there was as many as 41 states taxing food. And now the trend is to take the tax off of food nationally. So now there are only 2 states that continue to fully tax food, Alabama and Mississippi. 14 states have a partial tax, and we're one of 34 states that have no tax on food, which includes Texas, Colorado, Arizona, and several more states in the West.
Yeah, actually, there are 6 states that fully tax food right now, as of January 2015 or 2014. I just looked it up before I came over here, and Fred's right about the other part. There are 14 who tax at lower rates than the full state rate. So there's 16 total states that actually tax food at this point. I think maybe, Lorraine, one of us ought to start, and I would like to start explaining what the proposal is, because I think if you start the other direction, then we're going to have to figure out why he's saying what he's saying, what Fred is saying.
All right.
So if I lay the groundwork, then he can jump in at one point. First of all, it's been called the food tax, but the bill is much bigger than that. We like to call it...
This is your bill.
This is a bill we put. It's Senate Bill 274.
Introduced today by Senator John Arthur Smith.
Yeah, John Arthur Smith introduced it today, Senate Bill 274. And actually, it is a whole harmless tax reform measure that includes a component of putting local tax rates back on food. Not the entire state tax rate, just the local rates, which would be anywhere from 2 to 4.25%, depending on what city you live in. So it does not reinstate the state grocery receipts tax on food. It does not do that. We've been accused of trying to put the entire tax back on food. We're not. What we're trying to do is replace what is called a hold harmless provision that was granted to us.
It just stops me cold. What does it mean, hold harmless?
Yes, isn't it? I would like to do away with that term. However,
Yes. Give me another term for it.
It's probably accurately describes what happened. In 2004, when they wanted to repeal the tax on food, some food, not all food, the food basically was under the food stamp program back then. We told the legislature we could not afford that. Cities live on the grocery receipts tax. 75% of our income comes from grocery receipts. To take food out of that base would take a large chunk of revenue away from cities that provide police and fire services. So back then we created a food deduction. If you're a food retailer, you would deduct from your monthly report to the tax department the amount of food that's not taxable. That would then go into the tax department. They would calculate the local tax rates on that number and include that check in your check for the grocery receipts for the month. So that what you really ended up getting was, even though the tax was taken off of food, we received an amount equal to it as if the tax were still on food.
From
so
the
they
state.
call it a hold harmless
Okay.
provision. So, but this bill that's only one piece of the bill. Because along with that, we lowered the state gross receipts tax from 5 1/8 to 5, the state compensating tax from 5 1/8 to 5. We also increased the working families tax credit by $22.5 million. That was a significant increase. It's currently 10% credit for those people who qualified for the family tax credit. It will go to 14 if our bill were to pass. So that's a significant increase to help offset any tax that would be on food. And we'll get to that when we use some examples later. But we also repeal the 3/8 gross receipts tax that was put in place 2 years ago under House Bill 641. When they repealed the hold harmless provision over a 15-year period, they gave us authority to tax 3/8 for cities and 3/8 for counties. But those counties could tax inside cities. So what happened was then, if they did it, you end up with a 3/4% new tax, gross receipts tax in the state. And it has happened in some places. 11 counties have already enacted this tax. It's covering 1.2 million New Mexicans effective July 1st. Will pay new taxes.
Okay, let's stop there. So while we can hold that in our minds, we're going to have Fred. Would you address the complexity of those many layers of taxes? It's not simply food tax anymore, is it?
No, but it's mostly about the food tax.
Okay.
And just to reiterate, the food tax, which is fruits, vegetables, baby food, is a very regressive tax, meaning that it falls hardest on those who are least able to afford it. It's also on a necessity. And really, when you break this proposal down, what they're going to do is raise the food tax between 2 and 4%. So let's call it 3%. And they're going to lower the tax on everything else by 1/8 of 1%. So to translate this into real terms, if you, under this bill, if you go to the grocery store and you buy $100 worth of groceries, you're going to pay $3 in new taxes. Then if you go to buy a small screen TV, say, for $100, you're going to have your taxes reduced by 12.5 cents, or 1/8 of 1%. So it's a great deal for my friend and for the cities and the mayors and the city councilors. I don't think it's a good deal for working low and middle income New Mexicans and those who are living paycheck to paycheck, who are going to have to choose between, paying the rent check and buying their food.
Actually, Fred, that sounds like it's a good story, but it's not the entire story. Because when you look at the bill as it's drafted, the working family tax credit itself distributed almost $50 million last year. So if people are using that family tax credit, we intend to add $22.5 million more. So a family of 4 in Albuquerque, a mother and father and 2 kids that are on the food stamp program, would end up getting a benefit of $277 plus, because they don't pay tax on food because they're on the food stamps. Let me finish. If you're a single mother with a child and you make more than 24,000, say, or just above the food stamp eligibility program, you still do not get hurt by this proposal because the tax you would pay on food is offset by the working family tax credit that they would receive and the reduction that the eighth that you say is so little. But you remember, it's on every other item they purchase: diapers,
Toilet paper.
all the household necessities that they have to buy.
Okay, if I can respond.
Yes.
First, let's take people on food stamps. And Bill's relying on a common misperception that people that are on food stamps pay no taxes on food when there was a food tax in place. Actually, the food stamp program, which is called SNAP, is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Supplemental is the key word there. It was always designed to be a supplement to a family's food budget, not to replace it. So just so the viewers understand, people on food stamps in New Mexico get about $4 a day. That comes out to about a little more than $1.30 per meal. You cannot survive on that. So people that are on the food stamp program are still paying up to about 30% of their net income on food. So they're when there was a food tax, they were paying it. In addition, about a third of the people that are eligible for food stamps never received them, either because of pride or because of the bureaucracy. That's 130,000 New Mexicans, tens of thousands of children, that if we restore the tax on food, they'll be paying it.
Well, that's an interesting point, Fred, because it's only part of the story. As you talk about, I'm well aware that they pay tax on food above the SNAP program. In fact, that's why our bill reduces that tax. You supported a tax in 2004 that increased tax 0.5% on those very same people to pay for, quote, taking the tax off of food. Then the legislature increased taxes again in 2010 for different reasons, but those people now paid another eighth. And in 2013, they can pay as much as 0.75% more. We're taking that away. I'm aware of what you said. We're reducing that tax.
The bottom line, Bill, is that if you succeed with this bill, low-income people are going to be paying taxes that they weren't paying before. And you haven't even talked about the middle class. And you don't have to be very wealthy to be just over that line for food stamps. Those people are going to get the full hit of this 3 or 4% that you want to put back on food.
And they will qualify for the working family tax credit. It goes all the way up to $52,000.
And let's talk about that. So this is a credit that you only get if you know to fill out a tax form. And of course, many of these people don't owe any income tax, so they don't fill out the form. They're not in the habit of doing that. So when we do this, when we put credits in place like this, those people have to know to fill out the paperwork. If they don't do it, they don't get it. In addition, when they do it, they usually do it through one of these predatory lending outfits that take a high percentage of that money. So these credits that Bill is talking about are wildly inefficient. The most efficient thing to do is what the legislature has already done, which is to repeal the tax on food so that people get their rebate, what Bill is proposing, every time they shop. And it's very efficient. They get it right at the cash register by not having to pay tax on groceries.
Yes, so that means the tourist that comes here pays is tax exempt on their purchase for
That's
food.
true.
You and I, Fred, purchase a prime rib for $100. It's tax free. While a person on working poor buys hamburger and pays the tax, maybe a little tax.
Mm-hmm.
When you forget that we're giving $74 million back in tax credits currently. It is not something imaginary. Somebody's filing for these. $74 million is not insignificant. And want to add 22 more on top of that. You're approaching $95 billion in tax credits to deal with this issue.
Now, do you have a response to that?
Well, I'd just like to point out this, Lorene. If you look at our gross receipts tax system, and this is something where I think Bill and I can both agree, there are, at last count, about 338 exemptions for everything from ATVs to cigarette distributors,
To airplane mechanics, to
jet fuel, you name it, it's exempted. And I think we would both agree, having served on tax commissions together
Right.
that it would be better if our sales tax were lower and broader so that it fell more evenly and we all shared in the sacrifice. What I don't understand is we've got 338 of these tax exemptions, but it seems like I'm in this game of extended whack-a-mole because this comes up every so often. And this is the one exemption, the one on food, that broadly helps working low and middle income people. But I want to propose to Bill that instead of taxing food, that we look maybe at some of those exemptions instead and lower the GRT overall and broaden it to more things.
Yeah, Fred, I understand your point. You and I have talked about this before. Most of the tax credits and exemptions and deductions that are given are industry specific. They do not reach all 106 municipalities. They do not reach the 33 counties. They do not reach everywhere in this state. They are so specific that would only benefit, if you take those away, it only benefits a small area. They're not broad enough to cover the issue. So I've looked at a lot of those exemptions. Senator Scher's going to have a bill introduced already. He wants to take away all the deductions, all the exemptions, including church and Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. You think it's hard to pass something on food tax? Tackling those exemptions is going to be really difficult. Now, I've looked at it. You have to have something broad enough to reach all part of the state.
Now, we're speaking today with Bill Fulginiti, the Executive Director of the Municipal League, and Fred Nathan, the Executive Director of Think New Mexico. Let's just step back to common ground. I'm going to let you do your summaries about the food tax. But I want to thank you for your service to New Mexico. You both served under Bill Richardson, the Blue Ribbon Tax Reform Task Force. And you really looked at the overall, we do not have a good tax system. And in that task force, you came up with wonderful solutions, which were unfortunately not implemented. So basically, your philosophy of gross receipts tax, because that's one of the things to maybe get rid of, or even our very gross receipts tax system. Talk about where you agree about the tax system, and then let's look at what Tim Keller, as state auditor, will do. When he was a senator, he kept having these bills to look at all the tax expenditures, all those secret special interests, not secret interests, deductions that everybody gave, and maybe close some of those loopholes and start from a zero base. So what is your philosophy about taxing? I think you have that in common, that it should be.
Yes, Lorraine, I think we have in common our concern about the system itself.
Yes.
Whether you want to go to a sales tax system or keep it at a gross receipt system. The tax reform measures they're looking at today really are moving toward a consumption-based tax. And that's much like a gross receipts or much like a sales tax, but without all the exemptions and deductions. So you can lower the rate. And when you do that, it's better for everyone. But some of those exemptions are necessary. Some of the deductions are necessary. Going through those and identifying those will be a major work. And we've done it once before, and we'll probably end up doing it again. Unfortunately, I don't give that bill a chance of passage in the near future. And we're faced with the loss of our revenue starts this July. It doesn't start 2 years from now. It starts this July. And unfortunately, when we are having flat budgets because, quote, corporate reform that passed 2 years ago doesn't reach 106 cities. You can lower the corporate tax rate in the state. I haven't seen a corporation come in yet. And if they do, they're not going to come to all 106. They're going to come to very specific places. So we have to design something that reaches to all parts of the states and to cover those governments that have to work everywhere. And so when we do this, we could look at Representative Taylor and Senator Scher's approach, and we should look at it. But in the long haul, that's a very long-range issue. It's not a short not a short issue. We've been through this before.
I guess I would respond that we don't always have to raise taxes when we have deficits, and I would just point to Mayor Richard Berry in Albuquerque, who, according to the Albuquerque Journal, lost $2.2 million of hold harmless payments this year, has a shortfall of over $14 million, and he's not seeking an increase on the food tax or any other tax. And the other thing I guess we should point out here, Bill, is that not every mayor and every city councilor agrees with the Municipal League. Mayor Javier Gonzalez right here in Santa Fe, a Democrat, is opposed to bringing back the food tax. I talked to Roswell Mayor Dennis Kintai, who used to be in the legislature, conservative Republican. Javier's a liberal Democrat. They both agreed they don't want to bring back the tax on groceries. So we shouldn't assume that the Municipal League is speaking for all mayors and all city councilors.
Actually, you may want to double back and ask Javier one more time, because I've talked to Javier since then. And Dennis called me today, and he does oppose it. Well, but we're like a legislature. We have people go to our conferences, set policy. We have a representative from each city, and on those they voted 67-1 to support this. So when they go home, now not every city councilor on every city council or every mayor in a state is there voting, so they may not agree. But the bulk of the cities agreed, over 2/3 of them.
And I want to encourage you to ask your listeners to, if they're interested in this issue, they should talk to their mayors and city councilors, because sometimes there's a disconnect between what the constituents want and what sometimes our elected officials want. And it's, I think, important for those mayors and city councilors to touch base with their constituents.
And I always think the citizen involvement is really crucial. But one of the things we have here is the optics of food tax. People think you're taking food out of the mouths of hungry children, and Lord knows we lead the nation in hungry children. So immediately people are just appalled that you could be doing that. And when you see the intricacies, I know that Las Cruces last year, in anticipation of this, already raised their gross receipts taxes. So, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's again, the optics of how can you be against, feeding hungry children and the food tax. So I'm going to we have some other things to talk about, but I want to wrap up the food tax issue with giving you each, if you can do it in 30 seconds or so, your pitch about why your position on this is right, why it should be reinstated or why it should not be reinstated.
Okay. You want to go?
Okay. Well, I would just say again that it's a regressive tax, meaning it falls hardest on those who least can afford it, on a necessity, food, fruits, vegetables, and baby food. And I don't think we want to go back and join states like Mississippi and Alabama that tax food and put people in the position who live paycheck to paycheck between deciding whether to pay for the rent or food staples.
That's not exactly what the bill does. That's just a piece. This bill is good for business because it reduces the tax rates from a potential 9% now and over 8% in cities. It reduces that tax rate. And it reduces it as much as 3/8 in Las Cruces, because that would be repealed, and as well as the 1/8 that we're repealing generally. So you're talking about a 0.5% in decrease immediately. And so we're talking about tax reform at the basic level. Reduction of taxes, broaden the base, lower the rate, and handle the specific targeted assistance through the working family tax credit and low income tax credit. The numbers we ran show that they will not be hurt by this.
And for people, I won't.
One final thing. I'm in favor of tax reform, and I would agree that the gross receipts tax is broken. But, Bill, you're trying to fix the one part of the system that works, which is not taxing necessities.
All right. Now, I just want people who want to find out more, you can go to either fixthefoodtax.org or thinknewmexico.org, and you can write to your lawmakers and to your mayors and everything and get involved, because this is, everybody has to eat. Okay, quickly. The other thing that is killing us financially is health care.
Oh, yes.
I think New Mexico is proposing that they do something called the Sunshine Portal for health care.
That's exactly right.
Quickly, we don't have much time. This is the booklet you can get from Think New Mexico. The healthcare issue is killing us all. What are you trying to do here?
Well, right now in New Mexico, Laureen, it's easier to get information about the price and quality of a toaster than it is about a common medical procedure. And all we're trying to do is create a public website where people can go to get information about the price and quality of the 100 most common inpatient procedures at any of New Mexico's 44 hospitals. And they can go to our website if they want more information about this. We hope to have a bill introduced tomorrow.
How many states already have the Sunshine Portal for health care?
14.
Okay. It'd be nice for us to be in that
Yes.
group. Yes. Okay, Bill, you have some other exciting things. What's happening in these for election rules in little tiny villages? Like,
Well, we have, like I said, we have 106 cities, and 85 of those are very small. And election time comes up, and people have to file for election. Unfortunately, we don't have enough people filing to run for office. So we may have enough to file for a ballot, one for each position. Then we have to go through the cost of running that election unnecessarily. And our commission manager forms are going, we don't have to do that. We want a piece of legislation that will make that available for all towns. Don't go through the very expensive cost of running an election when you don't need to do that.
was it Tatum?
Tatum is one of the ones that
And-
pays $55 per vote to run their election, and nobody ran.
Why can't we have municipal elections at the same in November with everything else? What stands in the way of that?
A lot of times we looked at that, having it jointly with the general elections and the
Right.
primaries. The ballot gets so unwieldy, the lines of jurisdictions of where you vote and how you
That
vote.
makes sense.
The schools have said the same thing. You walk into a polling place and go, I'm here to vote for a municipal election. Okay. That's a different jurisdiction over here, and I don't know how they can do that yet.
Yeah.
Until we get that done electronically, that would really be a difficult thing for city clerks or county clerks to run.
You both have done so much for New Mexico. We have just 1 minute left. Can you give a shout out to our citizens? What do you think New Mexicans need to know about what's happening now, briefly?
You go first.
Bill.
What they need to know about right now is how they're going to handle the state budget with a severe decrease in oil and gas revenues. They're down over $200 million. That means the pressure on this legislature to come up with a balanced budget and provide those services is going to be difficult. They need to be involved and help their state legislators how to figure out how to spend the money appropriately.
We found something to agree upon, because I totally agree with Bill on this issue, which is that oil and gas issue overshadows every single piece of legislation, not just the budget,
It does.
but everything.
Yes. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Our guests today are Fred Nathan, Executive
having me.
Director of Think New Mexico, and Bill Fulginiti with the New Mexico Municipal League. Thank you both for all of you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Yeah. And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for wrestling with these very intricate but very, very important issues. This is Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.